Have you ever wondered why hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons all have different names? Before we dive into the fascinating answers, don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Extreme weather can still have disastrous impacts, generation after generation, no matter how far human civilization has advanced. And it appears that the frequency of these extreme weather occurrences is rising. You can frequently find news headlines about catastrophic storms occurring all across the world if you check the news.
Overnight, the U.S. territory of Guam has been bracing for a direct hit from Typhoon Mawar, likely the worst storm to hit the island in decades.
The important thing, though, is that these storms have particular names assigned to them. And no, I'm not referring to the names we give to other individuals. That was discussed in a prior video. We're delving into the names we give different kinds of storms today, focusing on hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons. Let's examine the differences now. Let's start by talking about what we refer to as these storms as a whole. They are referred to as tropical cyclones in some sources, tropical storms, tropical depressions, or simply cyclones in others. Because it's a more simple name, I'll go with tropical storms. The area between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn is known as the tropics, which is where these storms take place. The word tropic is, incidentally, derived from the Greek verb tropikos, which means to turn or change. When the sun reaches either its northern or southernmost position in the sky, it is said to appear to turn back on itself in the tropics. So in a nutshell, tropical storms are storms that form in our planet's tropics. Now let's get into the heart of the matter. Hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons are the names we use for these tropical storms in different parts of the world. From a meteorological perspective, there's no difference between them. They are essentially the same phenomenon. The variation in names is due to geography. Hurricanes. Hurricanes are those powerful tropical storms that tend to visit the North Atlantic Ocean and the Northeast Pacific Ocean. They often make a big splash in places like the southern United States, Mexico, Central America, and the beautiful Caribbean.
We've now got some breaking news on Hurricane Lee. Portions of New England are now under tropical storm and hurricane watches as the Category 2 storm approaches. Lee is weakening as it heads into cooler waters, but it will bring at least tropical storm force winds to New England starting Friday night, and dangerous waves and rip currents up and down the East Coast from South Carolina to Maine.
But what's really intriguing is where the name hurricane comes from. It's got a tail as gripping as the storms themselves. Picture this. Way back in time, there were the Taino people, the indigenous folks of the Caribbean. In their stories, there was a god of evil, a real troublemaker named Hurricane. This mischievous deity was the one responsible for sending those fierce winds that would wreak havoc on their lands. Now, fast forward a bit to when Spanish colonizers arrived in these parts. They heard these stories from the Taino people about the god Hurricane and the wild storms, and it all made sense to them. So they started calling these intense storms hurricanes, in honor of that mythic god, and over time, that name stuck like a barnacle on a ship's hull. So there you have it, the intriguing origins of the name hurricane. Cyclones. Now let's discover the story behind the name cyclone. Cyclones are those tropical storms that like to show up in the South Pacific and the Indian Ocean. They can really stir things up in countries like India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, the east coast of Africa, Madagascar, and even parts of the Arabian Peninsula. The interesting part is how they got their name. You see, cyclone has some fancy Greek origins. Way back when, the British East India Company had a lot of influence in the Indian subcontinent. In 1789, there was a British official named Henry Piddington. He witnessed a massive devastating storm in India that left quite an impression on him. So what did he do? Well, being a fancy British person, he decided this storm needed a new name. And where did he find that name? In Greek, of course. He coined the term cyclone from the Greek word kykalon, which means moving in a whirling circle. Why? Because these storms often spin around in a circle-like shape, especially when seen from above. So thanks to Mr. Piddington's choice of words, we now call these tropical storms cyclones. It's a name that's stuck around for quite a while. Typhoons. Now let's set sail to discover the intriguing origins of the name Typhoon. Typhoons are those tropical storms that like to brew over the northwest Pacific Ocean. They often make quite an entrance in places like Southeast Asia, Eastern India, Northern Australia, and sometimes even the Arabian Peninsula. But here's where it gets a bit mysterious. The name Typhoon isn't as clear-cut as some of the others we've talked about. It's like a puzzle with a few missing pieces. Some clever folks think it might be tied to Greek mythology and a figure known as Typhon. This Typhon guy was all about strong winds and chaos, which kind of fits the bill for these storms. But hold on! There's another theory in the mix. Some folks say it could have Arabic roots, like Tufan, which means big storm. And here's the twist. Tufan might just have borrowed a little something from that Greek word typhon. It's like a word borrowing adventure. So the exact origin of the name Typhoon remains a bit uncertain, but it's a name that's been swirling around in the world of storms for a long time. And just to clear up a common misconception, the direction in which these storms spin, clockwise or counterclockwise, has no bearing on their names. They can spin in different directions depending on their location relative to the equator, but this doesn't affect what we call them. Tornadoes and twisters. Now let's talk about something that might seem a bit like a sibling to tropical storms, but is entirely different: tornadoes. Tornadoes are a unique kind of extreme weather phenomenon, and they can happen in all sorts of places around the world. They're not just another name for tropical storms.
Tonight, millions bracing for a new tornado outbreak after more than 80 confirmed twisters in the last 72 hours.
The word tornado has a journey of its own. It's believed to have started with the Spanish word tornado, which means thunderstorm. And where did the Spanish get it from? Well, they borrowed it from Latin. In Latin, tornare means to turn. You see, tornadoes have this twisting, turning motion, so the name suits them well. So remember, tornadoes are like the wild cousins of tropical storms, and their name tells us they're all about spinning and turning, not just strong winds and rain. They can pop up almost anywhere on our planet, not just in the tropics. So there you have it, why we call these storms by different names. It all comes down to where they decide to show up and a bit of history. It's like a worldwide name game. These names show us just how cool and quirky language and culture can be, shaping the way we see the world. And hey, if you know other names for these storms in your language, we'd love to hear about them. Share them down in the comments below. It's like a stormy language exchange down there. That's all for today. Remember to support the channel by subscribing, liking, and commenting. And don't forget to ring the notification bell to stay updated. This helps our show thrive. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.